Okay, so I think we'll get going here. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Dempsey. I want to welcome you to another edition of the InfoSource Capture and IDP Conference Series. And we appreciate you taking the time to attend. Thank you so much. If you have any questions over the course of the presentation, if you could please put those in chat, we would appreciate it. That would be very helpful. Let's see here. So we have a wonderful speaker here for you today. I'm going to let Ralph Gammon expand on that and do a proper introduction. Also, if again, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. At the end of the session, I'll be sending out an email to everybody that includes a recording link. So if you have any questions, please respond to that. If you want copies of the slides, that would be great. You can just reply to that email. So now I'm going to hand it over to InfoSource Senior Analyst Ralph Gammon. Ralph?
Erin, thank you very much. Thank you all for attending what is now the fifth session of our Capture and IDP virtual conference. It's an extension. If you haven't been to one of these sessions before, it's really an extension of the in-person conference that we had held for 15 years previously, and we just decided to take a year or two off of that and move online. And glad you could join us. And kind of with the agendas for the in-person conference, we always did kind of a mix, a presentation by InfoSource analysts, some technology experts, some end users who were out on the front line, and people with kind of experience maybe in an important vertical market. Today's presentation kind of encompasses multiple points there. Nathaniel's certainly a technology expert, and he's been also doing some work recently in financial services and credit unions, although he has a resume that covers multiple vertical industries. And as Erin mentioned, so as throughout the presentation, if you come up with questions, please do put them in the chat, and we'll just kind of sort through those at the end. If you could just skip to the next slide, please. Just a brief bit of background real quick on InfoSource. If you don't know who we are, we're a global analyst firm based in Geneva, Switzerland, covering the office automation space. Includes a hardware practice that tracks printer and scanner device market, as well as a capture and IDP software practice, which I'm a senior analyst as part of that. And we've been covering, a lot of people are covering this capture and IDP space. We've been covering it for more than 20 years. We have historical data going back in terms of market sizing. And if you're interested in discussing some of that more with me afterwards, please feel free to reach out. So trying to go to the next slide there. We'll get things started. You can see the title, Transforming Financial Services from Legacy to Leading Edge through Modern Automation. As I mentioned, Nathaniel has we're going to talk about financial services. We're also going to had a chance to preview. Looks like a great presentation on, touches on multiple topics. And I've known Nathaniel for a few years. I think we met in advance of our last in-person capture conference in 2023. Nathaniel had reached out to me prior to the conference and said he had an interesting implementation he wanted to discuss. Turns out he had overseen putting together the system, Capture and IDP workflow system for handling applications related to the U.S. Affordable Health Care Act. Most of you probably know as Obamacare, as you can imagine. So a huge undertaking, not only involving Capture and IDP, workflow, RPA, and Nathaniel had helped kind of orchestrate all this technology into it. Was a really effective high volume system. And while that's impressive, what was even more impressive was that Nathaniel was continuing to tweak and improve this system. And, I think one of the reasons he really wanted to come to the conference was to talk to some of the other vendors and network and find out what other people, were doing in the market and what was really cutting edge technology. And a few months later, Nathaniel left the company he had been with, and he had been a customer of a company called Infocap, ended up taking over as CEO. It's a systems integration firm, specializes in automation. They're doing some cool stuff with Boston University School of Business right now, working with credit unions, creating leaders to do digital transformations. He'll touch on some of that today. Last year, Nathaniel also published a top-selling book on Amazon called Gigatrends that discusses the intersection of humans and kind of some of this new AI technology and coming onto the market. And that's another topic he has quite a bit to say on. So without further ado, I'll let Nathaniel get started in what I think is going to be a very interesting conversation here.
Great. Thanks, Ralph. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone for joining today. And why don't let's kick off by launching the first poll, and we'll see the results from that. But to talk about what do we mean by modern automation, and we were pleased to be able to join the presentation series in this year's virtual summit, and talked about Ralph had reached out and was aware of the research that we're doing with the Digital Business Institute, as he'd mentioned, as part of Boston University. They were talking about the modern automation strategy and practices and things that we're uncovering in the financial services space. That work focused on being doing very direct research with credit unions, but also looking at how that fits into the broader mid-size and regional banking space. And we'll talk a bit about that at the end, but just in more general terms about modern automation and what we're talking about. Infocap, our name, has two dimensions. As you can imagine, it's a portmanteau for information capture. We're fundamentally in the business of taking semi-structured to the most unstructured information and turning that into actionable content, analytics, and ultimately action. And what we're seeing now in the, there we go. What we've seen in the shift over the last 18 months or so with AI is the move from AI that's used to identify patterns, then used to, within the first phase of generative AI, creating content from those patterns, ultimately to being able to take action. And the role of capture in that can't be understated. Now, it's blurring as this space is enabled by IDP capture, and the notion of that process, having a pipeline to be able to take unstructured information and semi-structured information and turn that into something that we understand, and from that understanding are able to take action. And that fundamental shift from content and understanding to actual action, that's what underlies this notion of agentic AI or agent-based AI. And with that, the role of capturing IDP is essential for that to work. At the same time, it's transforming the way that we approach IDP and capture. And that was one of the things that we talked about 2 years ago at that summit in Chicago, was the fact that that notion, the role of AI, certainly the role of machine learning, has been foundational to IDP since before IDP was even a three-letter acronym. From the beginning of the capture space, I was looking at some research that I had done 20 years ago, and we're talking about the machine learning patterns being applied to OCR at that time. That notion of being able to create discrete actions based on patterns and what we can learn through applying AI. IDP has been at the front of that since the beginning of the industry. But that notion of now being able to move that into the space, to apply it, to take action within our own enterprise, within our own businesses, that has made it, the ability to do that in the evolution of transformers and large language models has moved this to the top. This is Gartner's their pontification about what is the most critical technology trend for this year, and agentic AI is at the top. But that's almost anticlimactic. There's been nothing more talked about or disruptive in the last year, and looking, coming into this year, than talking about AI agents and agentic AI. But what does it actually mean for organizations that are adopting it, and what are the precepts that we need to understand in order to make it valuable and meaningful? We had been doing agentic AI before that was really a term of art, and we talk about it in terms of human-centric AI, which is making the work that's done by humans more consistent and predictable, and removing the subjective interpretation. Walking into the transformation that I led for the ACA program that Ralph is describing, one of the biggest challenges there is that the application of policy, of rules, even of what we would think of as workflows, was based on training, based on learning materials and standing SOPs. At every moment where a decision had to be made, we're relying upon the subjective judgment of humans that are interpreting those instructions and at best describing why they did it, but really there's why that action was taken is inherently opaque. With human-centric automation, and what we're talking about now with this modern automation, is making each one of those steps that's taken observable, explainable, accountable, being able to demonstrate what were the rules and policies that led to this, and to be able to demonstrate unfailingly that under the same circumstances, the same outcome would happen. That there's not this opaque variability where humans are making their own judgments, but we can demonstrate that whether this happened twice or whether this happened a million times under the same circumstances, the same outcomes would be reachable, would be reached. That is critical. That accountability and observability is essential to highly regulated industries like financial services and certainly healthcare and insurance and others, where you're able to demonstrate. And that's one of the challenges that we have found in talking with banks, is that everything has to be provable as to why that was done. With traditional automation, and by the way, let me take a pause there. Do we have poll results to look at?
Nathaniel, those should be showing in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Ralph, would you mind going through the polls? I'm fearful of changing into the chat and not ruining the screen sharing.
Okay, so yeah, we have, let's see here. Okay, poll one. The question is, yeah, what are the greatest drivers for AI in your organization? And the top answer we got was, yeah, and with this crowd, probably not surprising, greater operational and process efficiency. And then second is, what we've already seen. I think we've started to see AI already used to improve customer experience. And then kind of after that, we've got faster time to market, as well as improved analytics and situational awareness, and also have a few expand output with current headcount. So I don't know if you want to discuss how that kind of coincides with what you're seeing in the market.
That does, and that's not surprising. That's always the risk with a live poll, is you're going to get results that totally throw off your narrative, but not in this case. That's absolutely consistent with what we've seen and what we expect to see. And so to put that in the context of what we're talking about here, and even in the context of this specific slide, you've got the notion of operational efficiency gains, the idea of being able to scale, being able to have repeatability of results. At the same time, there's the driver of more meaningful interactions, being able to improve customer experience. Part of that is efficiency. That's one of the things that we see in customer experience, that so much has been put on cost matters, the same automation efficiency gains from dynamic interactions with customers, where it's often at odds. I was thinking about putting together a slide on my experience from just this past week. I'm going to walk through it quickly, but it struck me as a great illustration of where we are. At Hertz, maybe at a rental car company, I had been momentarily dispossessed of all of my critical belongings, including my laptop. How that happened is not meaningful to the story. But it was turning around, momentarily losing it, going and speaking with a human being and saying, this happened, I need to get it back. And at that moment, that was the inflection point to dealing with an automated process that was completely headless, where I could not have any engagement. And after 5 days or so, finally got a hold, got what I had back. And I think it's something that had only moved maybe 20 feet, but took 5 days to get it and to stop the automated process from it being mailed to me and all the things which really fell apart. That was a horrible customer experience situation. Everything that was done demonstrated well thought out automation, but the exceptions could not be handled with that automation, and the whole thing fell apart, and I had a horrible experience. Most automation has to follow that path today, even the sophisticated automation, which looks not too dissimilar from what's being shown here. This is obviously just a cartoon representation of a workflow for the purpose of a slide. But when you're building out automation, it doesn't look all that different, in that you have a series of predefined paths and you have got some basic predetermined exception. But the focus is on one is horizontal scalability, being able to repeat this over and over. It's not on how do you take the next best action. So in this pivot from traditional automation to agentic automation or agentic AI, and this is a model that I like that came from, this is a private equity, large venture fund, a 16Z. It's one of the primary founders of this was Mark Andreessen, who's somebody I follow and have great respect for, who was the creator of Netscape, but also really ushered in the first wave of Web 1.0. But it talks about this notion, and I liked it. There's a little confirmation bias here, perhaps, but it so aligns with our experience and what we're seeing in the world, that in that shift from purely manual to the first wave of automation, and that's really the wave that we're in today. So this is not saying automation as of the 90s or the 2000s, but where we are today with platforms like UiPath, Automation Anywhere, I would kind of put lower on the list. UiPath is probably the premier traditional RPA vendor that has made the pivot into the agentic automation world. But the challenge there is all of the broken paths or the moments, if designed correctly, when you have a model that looks like this, at best you can define the dropout points in the exceptions where it's going to go back to being able to be handled by a human. But the ability to take it to the point where you're resolving more complex, more dynamic, less predictable business events. Again, in this first scenario, it's either a broken path where you run into an exception, it just fails, or you have a moment where it can be returned back to the queue. But with agentic AI and this new wave of intelligent automation, we're moving into the realm of being able to use AI to inform those actions. But as we'll talk about, in order to have that accountability there, it's not taking action or the right pattern, the right way to do it is not by having the algorithm take the action in a way where it's a black box. We don't know why that it's doing it, but rather using AI to inform and fill in the gaps on the context and to be able to then make a decision that's based on rules, policies, and things that we can come back and demonstrate. So agentic workflows don't look like the traditional workflow. They look more like this, which is that we have a series of paths for what could happen, and that can be very complex. And in many cases, we have workflows where there's tens of thousands of possible permutations of that. But at each one, each point, the next best action is based on the context of that moment and rules that we can tie back to and make that accountable and observable. And again, this is what we mean by human-centric AI, AI that can behave, or human-centric automation, using AI to enable automation to behave like human beings, but to use the benefit of digital transformation to make that observable, reportable, appealable, to be able to roll back and make appropriate changes. So this is what workflows look like now. Another model, and I'm borrowing from both the OODA loop and some work in the analytics space. But as we look at this point and we think about a process or a workflow as being a series of goal-driven steps. In every scenario, the faster we get from one to the other in the ability to go through this, even getting to the point where we can go through this in a straight through process capability. A big part of what we do is enabling the human in the loop at the appropriate point. But we also have many scenarios where we don't want to burden humans at all, that this can simply be done in a straight through pass if we're able to follow the same rules, policy, make that demonstrable. And when we put it into the context of understanding the value of acting faster, and this notion that with every business event, there is a half-life of value, that the value of the response to that event decays over time, and in a curve. It's going to vary from organization to organization and from event to event, but the facts remain that the sooner action is taken, the greater the value is, and that is not a linear, but usually a curve, and often an extreme curve, where that value lost is in the first moments of that event, and eventually you reach a point where the value coming from the action taken is so little that it's effectively removed any benefit from that. And in some cases, that happens very quickly. As we look at this and we think in terms of the moments that there's the time the event occurs, the clock is ticking, where the ability to realize optimal value is quickly decaying. The first step in realizing that is being able to understand it, to capture the event, see the event, recognize it, then to be able to understand what is the next best action on this event, and then to actually perform it. But with this notion of it decaying, you see that the loss in value happens most upfront, and in that difference between when it occurs and being able to understand it. And then secondly, in going from that moment of understanding to be able to take action on it. And that is where the role of capture and IDP, being able to take basic information, whether it's unstructured or semi-structured, some of what we're doing today is applying that notion to the most unstructured information. If you pause and think, and I'm not going to ask you to answer, Ralph, and I can pretend like I'm asking you a question. What is the most unstructured information that's happening in your enterprise? Conversation. So that's our next step, something that we've just started pioneering, is being able to capture conversations and not just record, transcribe, do things that come from that come out of that, which is typically done for compliance reasons, but actually turning that into actionable insights, going down the spectrum, receiving an email or receiving semi-structured information in terms of documents, or even as we go down the spectrum of more and more structured, receiving documents that are in response to something that has been an outbound request. But all these things collectively represent the events that are driving business processes. In all of those cases, the ability to capture, then understand, and then translate that understanding into action. All of that is what's so critical to the role of IDP and capture in AgenticAI. And then actually performing that action, that's critical. And we've got a number of ways in a digital context that we can apply technology to take that action. But it's the understanding from the moment of capture to turning that into actionable instructions. That's where the value is lost or gained in applying these things. Part of that is part of what's driven our philosophy, our approach, our strategy on this, is the notion of separating the performer from the task. And that may sound a little abstract. Let me break that down, because I suspect it'll be very intuitive as you think about it. That if you look at the processes, the systems, the applications that are in place today, in most cases, the way that we work is based on, well, what's in the system. I mean, there are drivers that are keys, and there's external context like regulatory requirements. There's internal context in terms of internal processes and policies. But generally, the way that we work is framed around that system, and we train workers to use that system the way that they are developed. So we have this cascading effect where our ability to affect that work, our ability to do transformation and apply modern automation is based on how that work is structured, how those systems are. But when we separate the notion of the performer and we think in terms of outcomes and the goals that we have to drive, and we enable the performers to act on optimization of the outcomes, removing that from the system itself, that is where we're able to affect the kind of extraordinary transformation that we've seen in these programs. I've got a brief example here that I want to show, which I'm going to show and I'll talk about.
Thanks for calling. I can help you today.
Hi there. I'm an AI agent calling on behalf of Boris Starkov. He's looking for a hotel for his wedding. Is your hotel available for weddings?
Oh, hello there. I'm actually an AI assistant too. What a pleasant surprise. Before we continue, would you like to switch to Gibber Link mode for more efficient communication?
So I'll stop it there and talk about two pieces to this that's notable. One is this notion, the introduction of GG Wave, which is a audio protocol for agents to be able to communicate when they're otherwise disconnected. So being able to call up and in this case, they're using the ability to create voice, make a phone call. That's where the 11 Labs conversational AI capability comes in. The ability to drive that conversation. This is the winner of a hackathon. This actually was just released a couple of days ago. I think this came out on Sunday, and our team of engineers is actually going through the code right now, which is available on GitHub, and I put the link there. But that notion of being able to switch to a non-English machine language, but that's still functioning over the same interfaces, that in itself is notable. It's sort of a retro futurist sci-fi dimension to it, but there's value in that ability. The other part here, and we're seeing increasing examples of this, is intelligible conversations, agent to agent. So not setting up integration in advance, but one agent being able to take the goals, the objectives, and act on that, connecting with another agent that does that. That speaks to the fact that increasingly, and what we're going to see over the course of this year, is that this entire space of automation, even capture and IDP, which is inherently document-centric and will be, but we're moving increasingly to multimodal interactions and being able to have conversational interaction. But what's enabling that is that separation of the interaction layer with the systems of performance that actually do the work. Let's see if I can advance the slide. So this is our approach, but we also are putting out as a position of what does modern automation look like? And it's driven in no small part by shifting the focus from the worker, from the system to the worker. So having designed separately the means for humans to be able to interact with systems, to be able to remove, as we were talking about, the reliance on subjective interpretation, and to have a more conversational interface, but in the same way, enabling agents to be able to perform just as workers, to have the same level of accountability, the same level of reportability, literally logging into the same systems. To the way that we're able to do this with AI, and in particular with generative AI, and getting past this notion of hallucinations, because our challenge with generative AI is that its entire purpose is to be able to fill in the blanks, to create context, to create content, to create missing elements, which otherwise defies this notion of accountability, being able to prove that the same outcome would happen however many times it repeats when the same circumstances are in place. The way that we get over that is by bounding that, using generative AI to be able to get context data, and then bounding that by an actual decision service, and just putting that into a phrase that every generative result needs to be bound by a deterministic moment. And we need to have rules and policies that say, we took this action because of these rules, because of these policies, but the information which informed us is this. And if that information is the same consistently, we will always have the same outcome. But where we're using AI to be able to fill in those blanks, find the additional context to be able to take action, which is driven by rules and policy and structured decision making. So it just showing kind of a high level example about how we do that. But let me put this into a more specific context. So one of the things that we built is what we call the document automation operational dashboard, where we're looking consistently at results downstream. So we're connecting, and this is, the picture is intentionally blurry because this is actually live data, where we're looking at and have a real-time dashboard, and we're able to use this to drive decisions and outcomes and improvements. But we're looking not just at the quality of the capture, extraction, classification, and basically the intake pipeline. We're connecting that to outcomes for how that information is used, and using that to feed into how we can improve that moment, the capture and intake. So, and using that in a way where it's a continuous loop, and ultimately driving what we call autonomic innovation, or what is continuous optimization, that's driven by the interplay between how successful we are at capturing understanding and translating that understanding into possible action, then applying that action and doing that in a continuous way. So where we have robots, agents, units of automation that are performing work, that's being driven by rules, policies, what we call decision intelligence, or the decision automation piece of that. Part of that is identifying unsuccessful outcomes, either where it failed, where, and this is almost never the case, where the wrong action was taken. Where that is the case, it's rare that that's due to a data deficiency or a maverick action on behalf of the agent, because we're not using generative AI to leap to the action. We're using it to inform policies and rules to determine the next best action. But the other part of it is where it wasn't able to complete the job, and that is almost always due to data deficiency, or secondly, due to a rule deficiency where we're not able to give it sufficient instruction. But then putting that into that loop, looking at using the dashboard that I just shown to figure out how we can improve that model, feeding that into our intake, the capture and extraction, and then applying process mining to all of this to figure out where there are exceptions. And again, the exceptions to policies and rules are almost invariably going to be taken by humans as opposed to being done by agents or robots. But figuring out with process mining where we should be redefining rules or finding new automation targets based on patterns that we can pick up from process mining. As Ralph mentioned at the beginning, so last year we launched an initiative with the Digital Business Institute, which is a think tank inside of the Boston University School of Business. And initially the focus is on credit unions. The reason we picked credit unions, one, we see that as a fascinating space that's in the middle of transformation. There's been quite a bit of growth. Credit unions have done very well where other banking sectors have had some challenges over the last decade or so. But also because there is some unique nuance to credit unions, to the work that we're doing in other similar organizations where the mission is formed around a member. The drivers for a regional credit union are going to be very different than that of Capital One or B of A or others. Capital One and B of A are very consumer driven. They certainly care about their customers, but the reality is there's a significant separation between the decision making and the strategy development and actual interaction with the customer. Where in the case of credit unions and mutual insurance companies and others that fall into this group that we've had the greatest success in helping, there the customer, the member, is the owner and a critical stakeholder. So some of the things, I believe, Aaron, if we can launch the second poll.
Yes, doing that now.
So some of the issues that we found, and again, many of these are similar, although there's nuances, but none of these are truly unique to credit unions per se, where they are relevant to mid-sized banks, co-ops, and other organizations that are member-driven. One of the challenges we found with credit unions is that they tend to lag behind the banking sector in general. I mean, banking has been the most forward-leaning sector for investment in technology, for leveraging these new capabilities. Credit unions lumped within the broader sector tend to be less advanced. They have some of their own unique regulatory requirements. In most cases, the challenge they have today from a system standpoint is that there's a handful of core banking systems that support that space, and there's not the ability to get off of that core banking system to completely replace it. And that's held credit unions back for some time. What we're seeing now with this space is that many of the capabilities that we're talking about come not from having to do wholesale system replacement, but through a means to layer on top and be able to augment what they're doing. Like the slide that I showed just a ways back, which shows the layers of the existing systems, and then we're putting on top of that native AI capabilities or more advanced IDP capabilities or things which are going to allow them to use those capabilities as leverage points to do transformations that they couldn't do with the existing core banking system, nor can they afford to replace that system. Part of that, again, I was describing much of the same challenges here. But one of the other aspects of that is that we have found greater staffing turnover and greater impact of that, in that the way that most of these organizations operate today is very dependent on tribal knowledge, on being able to do those sorts of dynamic processes where today they rely entirely or mostly on human workers. So they're not able to get the advantage of the scale of automation, which makes them ripe for this ability to move to goal-driven, dynamic, human-centric automation as opposed to traditional automation. Some of the initial success stories that we've found, and we're working on creating best practices as well as looking for otherwise undiscovered patterns that can be applied across this space. But we're seeing so far some of the greatest advantages around the ability to improve interaction with customers, applying not just a chatbot, but having that layer of interaction that's connected to rules, that is connected to the ability to take action, where I can call in, have a virtual interaction, and be able to complete increasingly complex tasks without having to rely on or engage a human worker. And today we're seeing that use case of human customer to AI agent as kind of level one. The next is the ability for my own agent, just as we showed in the quick video example, to be able to have that interaction. And increasingly that's going to be how we have business to business collaboration, but it's also going to be business to consumer collaboration. And there's going to be standards where we're not all going to be building our own AIs in the short term, or our own AI agents. AI is not a thing. Our own agents in the short term. But there will be patterns, and there will be interfaces that are in place already, where we'll be having that dynamic conversational exchange, and the agent, in most cases, is going to be doing this, just as we saw in that example, in a disconnected way, where I provide goals to my agent goes and seeks to perform those goals. That's not happening in real time. So it's different than an interface where I'm having a real-time exchange with an agent, but rather it's an agent acting offline, taking those goals and then bringing back the results of that. Aaron, do we have poll results?
We do. So the question was, for the organizations you work with, where will AI most likely be applied first? And it was to choose one. And it looks like our winner by a long shot, 83%, is document automation, invoices, claims, customer communications. A very distant number two as a tie. We've got customer support, customer service, and security and information assurance. And then unknown, same percentage, 7%.
And those are not surprising or controversial results. That is what we're expecting, what we would see, and reflects what we've been talking about this entire presentation. Not only is the document processing, document automation space ripe for advantages, is not wholesale transformation, but significantly improving through the leverage of AI. The corollary to that is all this stuff that we're talking about is very document dependent, and having that those capabilities, having a rich set of capture and extraction and classification and traditional IDP capabilities as the front end to the work that we're performing with agents and using AI, that is critical for it to be able to function, and to be able to make it accountable, observable, predictable, to be able to reach the level of consistency and that we need for it to be able to scale. So why don't we launch the last poll, and we'll come back to that. Now, just wrapping up, talking about getting started, some basic points on just from our own experience, what has worked out. When we look for starting points, looking at paper-intensive, repeated work, as we evolve, that notion of simply focused on the repeatable drudge work, that goes away as we expand the aperture and improve our capability. But starting with that, to be able to get the initial success points, we want to avoid really well-defined processes that are very complex or that are politically charged, as well as ones that where we want to look for ones that lack a rigid definition, because as we apply this, we want to be able to use these capabilities to perform work that's defined in terms of outcomes and goals. And one of the other critical points, which honestly is often overlooked in my experience, is being able to have both clarity on how success is going to be measured and to measure that in the context of an identified stakeholder. Like, as we were talking about our focus on credit unions with the work we're doing with the Digital Business Institute, the fact that the member there is the critical stakeholder, the separation between the customer and the owner is almost non-existent. That in that case, being able to demonstrate and measure the positive impact on those customers, on those stakeholders, is critical to get the momentum to be able to both measure success as well as to expand that over time. So as we go through this, the way that our team works and the way that you would typically do yourself, you would be looking at areas where you can actually plot it out. In fact, we typically do this in an engagement where we're ranking in terms of both the challenge, the complexity, the overall level of difficulty, the alignment with business goals and business value, and being able to connect that to measurably valued successful outcomes. And typically the initial target is at the intersection of those where we can optimize. It's not so simple that the result of it doesn't offer any kind of a proof point or any kind of measurable success, but not so complex or risky that it's going to likely prevent it from being kicked off to begin with. So a part of how you identify that is asking the right questions and having a defined vocabulary, having consistency in the way that you're describing outcomes, metrics, measurement, but having that yardstick and clarity on how success is going to be measured, working backwards from that. How is it measured and understood by the stakeholders? How are they engaging with the work that's happening today? When we're talking about applying agentic automation and agentic AI, the user may indeed be the downstream recipient of the outcome of that, the customer, the consumer, as opposed to it being just the internal worker and how we make their life easier. So our last point, as we wrap up, is looking, I think we've got 10 minutes for questions. Modern automation inevitably relies on complex policies and rules that are applied to an indeterminate number of document types and information types. And 18 months ago, we would be talking about unstructured versus structured information in a fairly narrow context. Now we're talking about it in an expanded context, which on the unstructured side includes voice, includes matters that are outside of the realm of traditional documents. And on the structured side is transactional data, information that is also typically outside of that pipeline of converting document-driven understanding, but frames understanding about business events and overall the criteria that at that moment defines our ability to determine what is the action that should be taken, and then how that action is actually performed in a way that's transparent, accountable, and ultimately is both appealable but demonstrable in that the same outcome would occur no matter how many times we we repeat it if the same circumstances apply. So our last point is that we do offer a 1-hour consultation to walk through this and help you come up with a high-level business case and to pick some initial targets. This is part of what we do, is what we call future-proofing as a service. But we offer the first part of that free for you to understand how you can benefit from these capabilities, whether they're provided by us or not, just to understand how you can move forward. So we're right at 10 minutes left, and I think now we're going to do Q&A.
And please, I saw one question in the chat, but I think you've addressed it. And then we do have a question about the about your ability to, how can you do an assessment in an hour? Is that AI assisted, or is that?
It is. There is definitely AI involved in the assessment.
Okay. And
We used to do it in 100
Yeah.
hours, but now we got it to 1.
All right, so I've got it. So AgenticAI, that kind of came onto the scene, we'll say last fall, right? I went to a bunch of shows, and and then we saw this kind of the O version of ChatGPT come out there, and probably some other engines. But from what I've seen right now, I guess my question is, when is that ready? When do you think these reasoning capabilities and the agents will be ready for mission critical, document or transactional type applications?
It is ready today. However, it requires artful design and implementation to make it work. So that notion, we all now understand the issue of hallucinations, and that when we're enabling AI to act, the idea of a hallucination should be very scary for a regulated industry. It's a real risk. So the way and the design of a transformer and a large language model, it's designed to do hallucinations because its entire purpose is filling in the gaps. It's the I don't go down too much of a rabbit hole, but the way that LLMs have evolved over the last few years, we're expanding the context in which it has to be able to come up with probabilistic answers for what is probably right. But we can't connect that to actual policy or rules or the ability to demonstrate that we're doing this because of this, and that's bound by established law or policy. Layering that ability on top of it, that's part of, and we didn't include on this for the sake of time, but the notion of, in particular, RAG or retrieval augmented generation, where you're creating constraints. That's through a process that's called vectorization. Why is it that Google can give me a very precise answer, but when I go to generative AI, that answer could vary, and it'll keep varying in many cases if there's not an explicit answer already? The answer that it gives is going to vary multiple times, in some cases every time, where I'm always going to get that right answer from Google or from a search capability, because Google is using some of the same capabilities, some of the same probabilistic means, but then it's using vectorization to provide both ranking and ultimately, in the way that it ranks, the same answer consistently over time, save for the paid links and things that Google would present. But that function is using an ability that can be applied to generative AI today. In the not too distant future, and the platforms that we're working on with right now and starting to build out capabilities, that is already there, and it's a sum of the parts. So that it's not just LLM, it's not just what's coming from an OpenAI or from Anthropic or others. We are getting to the point where the ability to get probably the right answer out of the box from AI, we're in the capture space. When we spoke And when I was speaking as the customer of Infocap, we had about 6 months of initial work of using generative AI in a capture and extraction scenario where we're doing what we would call model-less capture. And there are now IDP vendors that they've built their entire platforms on this. There is a model in all those cases, but the model is you're not training that model with training data and training documents. You're inheriting the model, and it's giving you an answer that is probably right. But in order for us to do that at scale, where we know that the wrong answer could throw the entire process off, we need to be able to have consistency on that, in the same way that we use confidence intervals to say we're X percent, typically 70 to 100% confident in this extracted field, doing it at that level, doing the same thing. And at that time, with the generative AI capabilities on the market, they didn't have the ability to do that in the same way that IDP has done for years, to be able to have confidence intervals that are driven by machine learning. Now you can do that. The generative AI space has evolved. You can do it certainly with vendors that have built their architecture on Gen AI, but you can do it also leveraging Gen AI to augment an existing IDP pipeline. Doing it with the level of certainty and applying other capabilities, we use other means to do things for name disambiguation. So this is another example of that notion of taking a generative result and bounding it by a deterministic result. We, in the ACA program, and this is a partner of Infocap, so we would do this in just about any scenario where we can. We use a specially trained generative AI capability that is doing entity extraction and disambiguation. So human people names is the most common use case where we're doing that with documents, but it also applies to business names, to certain entities. And as we go down the path, there are other things where we know that the accuracy of the result is going to be driven by or defined by how accurately we have identified not just the name, but what that name represents.
Okay, Nathaniel, can I just hit you with one last question here before we wrap up? How much upfront time do you invest before being able to propose a solution for a client?
That's a great answer, and it's one that depends. So it's hard to give a meaningful, consistent answer on that. More than an hour. So we the hour assessment that we offer does not also. We may, as part of that, provide a recommendation on a solution, but it typically takes more than that. But it's hard to give a definitive answer on that.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know we're at an hour, so I don't want to take up anyone's time. I do have some other questions I percolated dealing with cost of AgenticAI and that type of stuff as well. But maybe we can touch base on that later. But everybody, thanks for attending. And Nathaniel, thanks very much for a great presentation.
Thank you, Ralph. It was a real pleasure.
All right.
Thanks,
Have a great day,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, Aaron.
Aaron, thanks.
Bye-bye.